Good day, everyone. Let's go to lesson 2. Lesson 2 will be about cellular and injury and cell death. So the first term that we will describe is homeostasis. So this is already a review. So homeostasis, that means it is from the Greek word meaning same, steady, and it refers to any process that living things use to actively maintain fairly stable and um, those conditions necessary for survival. So, lagi niyo mga may incorporate sa homeostasis yung salitang balance and equilibrium, which will result to a stable environment within your body. So, any self-regulating process by which biological systems tend to maintain stability while adjusting to conditions that are optimal for survival. So, optimal for survival. If homeostasis is successful, life continues. If not, then disaster or death ensues. So, it must be in balance, or your homeostasis must be working, or it must be achieved. Cells actively control the composition of their immediate environment and intracellular milieu within a narrow range of physiological parameters. So that is your homeostasis. Then under physiological stress or pathological stimuli, that is your injury, cells can undergo adaptation. So when your body is under stress, or there is a pathological stimuli, maybe injury or damage to your tissues, your cells can adapt to achieve a new steady state that would be compatible with their viability in the new environment. So, syempre, kapag yung cells mo hindi siya nakapag-adapt, it will result to the death of your cells. Then, if the injury, ayan, ito yung sinasabi ko, if the injury is too severe, hindi niya na kayang mag-adapt, so that is considered irreversible injury. The affected cells will die. So, these are the causes of cell injury. So, hypoxia and ischemia. Hypoxia, that means low oxygen in your tissues. And ischemia means reduction of blood flow. So, kaunti yung blood flow, maybe may bara sa mga ugat, kaya hindi masyado nakakadaan yung blood. So, that will also result to hypoxia, which is the decrease in oxygen to your tissues. Chemical agents. So, these are the chemical agents that can cause cell injury. Arsenic, cyanide, mercuric salts, insecticides, herbicides, carbon monoxide, alcohol, narcotic drugs, etc. So, these are just some examples. So, kapag nalanghap mo siya or nagkaroon ka in contact dyan, so it may cause cell injury. Physical agents, so mechanical trauma, accidents, thermal trauma, both extremes in temperature. It can cause cell injury. Electricity, nakuryente ka, radiation, ayan. So, kapag nagpapa-x-ray ka, CT scan, so, di ba meron siyang, what do you call this? Yung tatanungin ka, pwede kang magpa-x-ray ulit is after ganitong buwan. Okay, so, that is to prevent too much injury sa cell. Rapid changes in atmosphere pressure. So, di ba kapag, example, nasa ilalim ka ng dagat or whatever pool, kapag pababa ng pasisid, so parang mayroon ka nararamdaman na pressure, 'di ba? So that is some type of pressure. Next, immunological agents. So infections pala, gets nyo na yan. Pwedeng bacteria, virus, parasites, then immunological reactions. So, it can be hypersensitivity reactions, anaphylactic reactions, and the autoimmune diseases. Then, genetic defects, of course, nutritional defects, kapag for example, malnourished ka, walang masyadong nutrients na natatanggap ang cell mo. Hindi sila makakapag-carry out ng kanilang mga processes. Okay? Then, aging. So, of course, normal phenomena sa ating katawan. Kapag matanda na yung cell mo, it will eventually die. So, this is the cell injury. So, this is the normal cell under homeostasis. Now, if your body underwent stress, your cell can either adapt, okay, Kapag hindi siya nakapag-adapt, it will result to cell injury. Okay? So, either stress or injurious stimulus. So, sa cell injury, kapag na-injure na yung cell mo, pag severe, doon muna tayo sa mild. Pag mild or transient, pwede mo siyang i-reverse ng cell mo. So, it will adapt, then it will go back to your homeostasis. Now, kapag hindi kaya mag-adapt, if it's too severe, it will result to irreversible injury. It's either necrosis or apoptosis, which are the types of cell death. Okay? So here, these are the outcomes of cell injury. The first one, recovery of cells. So in case of reversible, ang recovery of cells, under yan ng reversible injuries. It restores full structure and functions. Okay? So yan. Cell adaptation. Ito yung mga cell adaptation, atrophy, hypertrophy, hyperplasia, and metaplasia. Cell death. It occurs by necrosis or apoptosis in cases of irreversible cell injury. So, kapag narinig nyo yung irreversible, ang kanyang, that is the endpoint, cell death. Next is inflammation, occurs after cell death and necrosis in acute and chronic forms. Then the tissue repair includes cell regeneration and fibrosis after inflammation to fill the gap. So, yun lang. Next, dun muna tayo sa reversible cell injury. For example, if the ischemia or hypoxia is of short duration, so maikling panahon lang, the effects, pwede siya maging reversible. On rapid restoration, so given na yung restoration mo or yung pag-cope ng cells mo is fast. Non-lethal damage, which generally can be corrected by removal of stimulus. So, let's say for example, meron kang coronary artery occlusion, may bara. So, nagkakaroon ng cell injury kasi may bara, kulang ang blood flow. So, that is ischemia, which will result to hypoxia. So, kapag tinanggal mo yung bara, so magkakaroon ka ng reversible. Babalik siya sa normal pag tinanggal mo na yung bara. Okay? That's example. So, ano nangyayari kapag merong reversible cell injury? First, decreased generation of ATP, intracellular lactic acidosis, or nuclear clumping, damage to plasma membrane pumps, reduced protein synthesis. So, we will discuss these one by one. The first, decreased generation of ATP. So, this is needed for many cells, right? So, living cells require continuous supply of oxygen to produce ATP. So kailangan daw ng oxygen para magkaroon ng ATP. Now, kapag meron kang ischemia or hypoxia, kulang ang oxygen mo, which will result to decreased ATP generation. Kasi nga, kailangan niya ng oxygen, konti. So, konti lang din yung ATP mo. So, in ischemia, aerobic respiration as well as glucose availability are both compromised. Kasi nga, blood supply ang kaunti ang affected kapag ischemia. So, respiration as well as the glucose availability. Compromise siya parehas, resulting in more severe. So, mas severe ang ischemia and faster effects of cell injury. Whereas, kapag hypoxia, so from other causes can be RBC disorders, may heart disease ka, lung disease. So, mga anaerobic glycolytic, ATP generation continues. Thus, cell injury is less severe. So, this is intracellular lactic acidosis or nuclear clamping. So, na second one ito. So, dahil nga konti yung oxygen supply sa cell, the mitochondria fails first. So, sa mitochondria, the classic explanation, the powerhouse of your cell fails first kapag kulang ang oxygen. Wala siyang mayu-utilize para magawa niya yung kanyang trabaho. Next, anaerobic glycolytic pathway activates and generates ATP. So, dun tayo sa pathway na hindi kailangan ng oxygen, which is the anaerobic. So, magja-generate siya or mag-activate siya para magkaroon ka pa din ng ATP kahit papaano. This results in rapid depletion of glycogen and accumulation of lactic acid, which lowers the intracellular pH. Ayan, yung mga consequences ng pag-activate ng anaerobic glycolytic pathway. So, madideplete yung glycogen, and mag-accumulate ang lactic acid, and it will lower the intracellular pH. Paano ba pagka-lower ang pH? Acidic. Ayan nga, accumulation of lactic acid. Madaming lactic acid, lower pH. And it will fall in intracellular pH. It will result in the clumping of nuclear chromatin. Next, damage to plasma membrane pumps. So, kulang ang ATP, it will interfere in generation of phospholipids. Para saan ang phospholipids? That is required for the continuous repair of membranes. So, importante ang mga membranes, diba? So, for protection. So, this will result in the damage to membrane pumps operating for regulation of sodium and calcium. So, membranes, kasama din siya sa regulation ng mga pasok at labas sa loob ng cell. So, number 1, the failure of sodium-potassium pump. Okay, so, si sodium, nasa labas, diba? Si potassium, intracellular. Analyte yan. So, si sodium-potassium pump, this pump allows active transport of sodium out of the cell. So, normally, sodium is out of the cell. And diffusion of potassium inside the cell. So, wag malilito, sodium out, potassium in. Lowered ATP in the cell interferes with this membrane-regulated process. So, si ATP lowered na naman, so meron siyang kinalaman sa regulation ng membrane processes. Next, intracellular accumulation of sodium and diffusion of potassium out of the cell. So, ito yung result or consequence nito. So, hindi lalabas si sodium at hindi makakapasok or, lalabas si potassium sa cell. What will happen? Increased sodium in the cell leads to increase in intracellular water. Kasi nga, where sodium goes, water follows. So, magkakaroon ng maraming intracellular water to maintain osmotic conditions and hydropic swelling occurs. So, swelling ng cell. Next, paano naman yung calcium pump? So, it will also fail. So, membrane damage causes disturbance in the calcium ion exchange across the cell membrane. So, excess, diba si calcium kailangan siya sa mga processes pa rin inside the cell. So, meron siyang signals, okay? So, excess of calcium moves into the cell, particularly in the mitochondria. So, swelling and deposition of phospholipid-rich amorphous densities. Then, damage is seen in the form of the loss of microvilli, intramembranous particles, and focal projections of the cytoplasm, blebs. So, yun yung para siyang mga, hindi siya natural na mga, di ba kapag cell, parang medyo bilog siya, di ba? Pag blebs, tandaan nyo yun, para siyang may kulugo. So, hindi siya normal projection. Next, reduced protein synthesis. Due to continuous hypoxia, membranes of the ER or the endoplasmic reticulum and Golgi apparatus swell up. So, mamaga kasi nga walang oxygen. Ribosomes, nawawala siya sa ER. So, endoplasmic reticulum. So, di ba nga si ribosome, site of protein synthesis, ay nagdidetach siya from the granular ER. Then the ribosomes, it disperses in the cytoplasm and it inactivates their function. So, walang synthesis ng protein. Okay? So, yan. Protein synthesis reduced in the Golgi apparatus. Next, the irreversible cell injury. It denotes pathologic changes that are permanent and causes cell death. They cannot be reversed to normal state. So, for example, if yung blood supply mo into the heart muscles is cut off for 10 to 15 minutes, so this is in the cases of kapag may cardiac arrest, walang tibok ng puso, hindi na CPR. So, kapag nagpatuloy yan ng 10 to 15 minutes, it will result na sa irreversible cell injury. So, kung mapapansin nyo, sa yung mga tunay na medical drama, for example, Grey's Anatomy, yan, makatotohanan naman yun kahit paano. Okay? So, once na tumigil ang puso, matotoxic na yan. Everybody should, what do you call this, hindi naman panic. Kumbaga, mas mabilis yung kilos. They have to revive the patient, revive the heart. Make the heart pump again. Kasi nga, kailangan ng heart to deliver blood all throughout the body, especially sa brain. Okay, so kapag nagpatuloy ng 10 to 15 minutes, the myocardial cells will experience injury. Okay, yun. However, if the blood flow is cut off for longer period, the myocardial fiber dies and necrosis occur. Ito pala, kapag more than this time, so magkakaroon ka na ng necrosis sa iyong myocardial cells, which is in the heart. So, events in irreversible cell injury. So, ATP depletion. So, wala ulit. Konti lang ulit yung ATP. So, result of mitochondrial dysfunction, lack of oxidative phosphorylation, depleted, and the production of energy is reduced. Cell membrane damage. So, the earliest phase of irreversible injury is associated with functional and structural defects. Yan, yung unang phase of irreversible injury. Nawawala ng function at structure. Next, a great deal of evidence indicates that the cell membrane damage is central factor in pathogenesis of irreversible injury. So, kapag nasira yung cell membrane, ayun, it is a great factor sa irreversible injury. Intact cell membranes are essential, okay, to maintain the normal cell permeability and volume. So, kapag nawala yung membrane mo, or yung integrity nito ay compromised, it can cause massive influx of calcium from the extracellular space kapag pumasok sa cell, which will result to the mitochondrial dysfunction. So, magfe-fail yung mitochondria. Ano pa? Activation of intracellular enzymes and denaturation of proteins. So, those are what happens in irreversible cell injury. Now, let's go to cell death. So, a complex phenomenon that forms the basis of for most disease processes. So, it is the loss of biological activities and change in the architecture of the cell as a result of irreversible cell injury. So, death is one of the most crucial events in the evolution of disease in any tissues or organs. So, kapag nawala ng activity at yung architecture ay naiba, most likely your cell is undergoing cell death. Okay? It is now known that there are at least two distinct types of cell death: apoptosis, also known as the programmed cell death, and necrosis. So the first one is necrosis. It is the death of a group of cells in a living tissue and complete lysis of these cells by their own enzymes. So pag the cell died by their own enzyme, that is called autolysis, or other enzymes from recruited inflammatory cells. So, kapag galing naman siya sa neutrophil, sa macrophages, that's heterolysis. It is the major pathway of cell death in many commonly encountered injuries, okay, such as those resulting from ischemia, toxins, infections, at trauma. So, yan. Kapag yung mga usual na causes ng injury, it will result to necrosis if hindi na cure. So, the term necrosis, it was first used by morphologists referring to a series of changes that accompany cell death, largely resulting from the degrading action of enzymes and lethally injured cells. Necrotic cells are unable to maintain membrane integrity. So, ito ay compromised, so yung mga contents sa loob ng cells mo, it often leaks out. So, lumalabas. Apoptosis naman, literally, apoptosis means falling off something. So, example, the leaves of the trees. The falling of the leaves. Okay? So, scientifically, it means programmed cell death, affecting a single or small group of cells as a result of signal transduction of specific genes. No bata-bata ako, kala mo tandaan na, diba? So, nalagi ako nalilito sa necrosis at apoptosis kung alin dyan si programmed cell death. So, natatandaan ko si apoptosis as programmed cell death kasi siya yung may letter P. P, apoptosis for programmed cell death. Share ko lang. Ayun. So, programmed cell death siya, affecting a single or small group of cells, and that is a result of a signal transduction of specific genes. So, hindi siya yung mga mechanical sa toxin, infection, inflammation. Ito ay some sort of mga signal from specific genes. So, whereas necrosis is always a pathological process, apoptosis serves many normal functions. So, it can be normal. Okay? It's not necessarily associated na pathological cell injury. Okay? And the dying cells are scattered throughout the tissue. Si apoptosis, that is a process of self-destruction in which the cells shrink, so lumiliit, as a result of the decrease of cytosol, organelles, and the nucleus is fragmented. So, nagkakaroon ng parts. So napafragment siya into small parts without loss of membranes. So, yung mga organelles, nalalize, nasisira, and repelled outside the cells. And the cell disintegrates into fragments. So, yung mga fragments ng disintegration, that is called apoptotic bodies. Apoptosis also differs from necrosis in that it is essential to human development. So, paano nagiging useful ang apoptosis? For example, in the womb, so buntis, yung baby, so when we were still a fetus, so our fingers and toes are connected to one another by a sort of webbing. So parang yung mga paa at kamay ng frog. Okay? So apoptosis is what causes the webbing to disappear. Yan. So si apoptosis yung nagtatanggal dun sa pagkakadikit-dikit ng daliri natin. Kaya, ayun, nagkakaroon tayo ng 10 separate fingers or digits. Next, as our brains develop, the body creates millions more cells than it needs. So, mas marami sa kailangan natin. So, yung mga hindi nagfo-form ng synaptic connections, ibig sabihin, yung mga hindi kayang panindigan yung kanilang responsibility. They undergo apoptosis. So, hindi ko naman kayang gawin yung mga responsibility ko. Magpapakamatay na lang ako. Ganon. So that the remaining cells, it can function well. Okay? So, programmed cell death is also necessary to start the process of menstruation. In the average adult, between 50 to 70 billion cells die each day by apoptosis. So, inhibition of apoptosis can result in a number of cancers, autoimmune disease, inflammatory diseases, whilst, yan, ito kapag kayong, what do you call this, yung kakaunti yung apoptosis, hindi masyado nakakapag self-destruct yung mga cells mo. Pwede siyang cancer. Now, kapag naman hyperactive or sobra ka naman sa apoptosis, it can lead to neurodegenerative diseases, marrow-aplasia, skin disease. So, sobra. Busa ka na cell. So, konti yung cell mo, ano mangyayari sa bone marrow mo? Mag-overtime yan sa paggawa ng mga blood cells. So, ito yung marrow-aplasia, marked reduction or defect in the pluripotent committed stem cells. So, reduced siya kasi nga, yung mga stem cells, kailangan niyang mag-adapt kasi hyperactive yung apoptosis, ang daming namamatay na cells. Okay, this is the comparison between apoptosis and necrosis. So, ATP, type of control, lysis of cells, ito not found. Pag apoptosis, only reduction in cell size, whereas necrosis, complete lysis, so wasak. Tissue reaction, no inflammation around dead tissue. Necrosis, may inflammatory cells, so yun yung mga WBCs. Type of stimuli, so it can be physiological or pathological. The necrosis, pathologic only. Okay? So that ends the cell injury and cell death.